Hello, everybody. My name is Wamuyu Mahinda, and I'm here this, I don't know whether it's afternoon for you, it's evening for me, to make a presentation and to talk to you about the work we're doing at Catalyst 2030. I am currently sitting in the Governing Council of Catalyst 2030, and I am the co-chair for Africa chapter, as well as the lead for the Africa Forward initiative that we'll be discussing this afternoon. I'm with my colleague, Wando, Jenny, see her there, and she's our communication, media, and marketing lead, and she'll be supporting me in this presentation. I'm going to ask her to start off by talking about Catalyst 2030, what we do, and so on. And then I'll come in and talk about Africa and the Africa Forward initiative. So thank you very much for coming and being part of this. We look forward to a very interactive session, and the one that will give us a lot of information about the work that we're doing.
Good evening, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I'm so excited to be here. Lovely to meet everybody. My name is Wando. I am based out of Lagos, Nigeria, working in communications at Catalyst 2030. This is a very unique opportunity to share about our organization. It's a platform that is fast growing, and it's a global movement that is made up of people, members, organizations, and all are committed to achieving the UN Sustainable Goals. So it's very urgent for us because 2030 is right around the corner, and we've been committed. This is a growing movement with about 197 countries that are collaborating together, with about close to 2,000 members shortly, and about 1,400 member organizations. And it's really critical that we are focusing on the communities, on policy, on business, on government across the world. And Catalyst 2030 members are changing systems all through different levels on barriers in education, on climate. And one of the campaigns that we're going to talk about is a bold new strategy called Africa Forward. Now, it's interesting because this organization, this platform was created or launched about 2 years ago, or shortly within the 3-year mark. And it's really led by social entrepreneurs, and it's really an innovative movement. We just held our 45th Governing Council, and there were a lot of reflections on when it got started. And some of the partners that kickstarted this initiative were Echoing Green, Shaw Foundation, Schwab, and Ashoka. And I want to direct you for more information to catalyst20.net. 2030.net, so you can get more information on this initiative. Why did this initially kick off? One, lack of resources, minimal collaboration. We know that a lot of people are moving in silos. There's a little bit of disconnection between funding models and decision making, and this causes barriers. So one thing that we are pushing in 2030 is to connect people, to create collaborations, and use platforms such as today to accelerate and work together to see how we can achieve the SDGs. Our strategy is driven by a vision, 3 clear objectives that are to enable an environment to collaborate, very important, and facilitate system change. We are working towards supporting dominant culture, and this is one of the roles that I play very heavily on, and which is looking at the global south, looking at local communities and putting them first where all our initiatives are held. And so we invite you to join the journey. We invite you to share with us and partner with us. So a lot of the things that we're working on, you hear a lot about in Dr. Wamuyu's presentation, which is about systems change. But I just want you to key into that it's about joining together, it's about the community, and it's about collective action. Some of our signature events, and I would love to plug this in. One is Catalyzing Change Week, one of the largest social innovating sessions that are held every May. It's about 250 sessions, so mark your calendars because you'll be hearing from us. And we have another method or platform, which is called the awards, Catalyst 2030 that we would like to use to drive systematic change. And this is to celebrate and talk about inspiring communities, governments, policymakers that are making that difference, and carving out a niche for funders, for donors that are also working towards that. And so these are two big initiatives that we work on alongside. I just want to share that we are global across Africa. We have chapters in India, one of the largest, Latin America, Australia, Europe, and MENA. And these are chapters that are active, that are coming together to have breakthroughs, initiatives that are working closely to drive this systems change. So if you have any interest, we have Susanna at Catalyst 2030. If you want to start a local chapter, it could be mission-led, it could be local, regional-led, and this will really bring people together. And I want to now introduce the speaker, who's going to share a little bit about one initiative that is very dear to our hearts, which is Africa Forward, which started in May, or kicked off or launched in May. And this is Dr. Wamuyu Mahinda. She's based in Cairo today. I said Cairo, Nairobi, Kenya.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, I got Cairo. I wish I was in Cairo. And this is somebody who's been driving systems change for a few years, and she has worked across platforms she's a managing partner with Values Partners Africa. She's an Ashaka Fellow, and she's within the Governing Council and one of the forces behind Africa Forward. So I'm very pleased to have her here today to share a little bit about this initiative, which is very dear to us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Wando, for introducing Catalyst 2030 and also introducing me. I appreciate that. Let's move on to the next slide, because I want to talk about the initiative, the Africa Forward initiative, which was created by members of the Africa chapter last year in May during the Catalyzing Week that Wando talked about. It's initiative that is supposed to accelerate actions that place African challenges at the heart of collaboration and partnership. So we are excited about this initiative because the members themselves have identified the areas that they want to focus on and areas that they want to improve, and where they are also looking for partnerships from the rest of the world. Next slide. So the 5 strategic shifts are narrative shift, ecosystem development, funding, job creation, and career counseling, and training and capacity development. Just to give it a little body information where we were coming from when we focused on the 5 pillars. We're looking at, in the narrative shift pillar, we're looking at empowering the African social entrepreneurs, because we want them to drive the agenda for Africa. We want them to solve the solution or solve the problems through the local solutions that they have come up with. Because as you know, social entrepreneurs are very innovative and they have solutions, but sometimes we don't give them the platform to push the solutions that they believe in and support them in whichever way that we think is necessary to ensure systems change. Just even thinking about, for example, the climate change challenges that we are facing. How much responsibility, ownership have the leaders in Africa taken up to ensure that we in Africa are actually solving problems of climate change in Africa? So that is the narrative shift that we are looking towards building in the next few years. When it comes to the ecosystem development, we believe and know that we can't work in silos, and that we have to bring in everybody to ensure that we make the systems change that is necessary. Are we working with governments? Are we working with private sector organizations? Are we working with other social entrepreneurs? Are we building synergies within the experiences that we have? We have diverse experiences. Are we bringing those experiences to ensure that the synergy results in the kind of transformational change that we are looking at? For the funding, this is an area that is very, I should say, sad in a way, because a lot of funding is coming into Africa, but unfortunately, very few Africa-led organizations are taking charge of these funds. They work based on sometimes advice from organizations that are not based in Africa, and therefore solve the problems in a way that is not necessarily the way that they believe it should be done. So we're looking at more Africa-led organizations directly responding or working, or should I say, leading the way the funds are directed in Africa, or in the work in Africa. So when it comes to job creation and career counseling, we know that unemployment in Africa is really a major challenge. And it's as a result of many things. Sometimes it is that we have we don't have the young people don't have the right skills. It is that they have other social challenges that probably need counseling. And this pillar is going to be looking at that to ensure that we're solving the problems of job creation in Africa. The fifth but not last pillar is on training and capacity development. We want to ensure that all the skills gaps that exist within the leadership of social entrepreneurs in Africa is looked into. What are those gaps? Why is it that we're not necessarily making the steps and fast enough as is the case? Because we believe that we have good solutions for Africa. But why aren't we moving as fast as we'd want to do? Why aren't we accelerating the solutions that we have for Africa as fast as we'd want to do that? So we want to look at the gaps. What are the skills gaps? Why aren't we collaborating enough to ensure that we have the results that are key for the progress that we want to do, that we want to see? Now, just to give you an example, and I'll give you an example of the ecosystem development pillar. But before I do that, for the Africa Forward initiative, we want to support members who are, should I say, championing the different pillars. And we are calling them field catalysts, because these are the people who will deploy the different capabilities to influence and augment the field's effect to achieve transformational change. So every pillar, we have identified social entrepreneurs who are already in doing some work in this area, and we're going to support them very specifically to scale up the work that they're doing, as well as bring other social entrepreneurs on the fore and work together to ensure that that is met. So we after identifying the field catalysts, we are going to support them in different ways depending on what the gaps are. And then we're working on measurement tools to ensure that the work that we do is documented for others to see and appreciate, and also for those supporting us to appreciate that there's a difference that's coming as a result of this work. Then, of course, we're looking to ensure that funds come directly to these field catalysts, so that the work they start to do, it moves fast enough and has the kind of impact that we're looking at. So the next slide gives an example of the work that we're doing in the second pillar, which is the ecosystem development. This is work being done by Collaborative Value Partners Africa. That's the organization that I am managing partner. And we have developed an ecosystem development model that is called the collective enterprise model. And this model was designed after research that was done in Africa in 19 countries. And this model results from an understanding of the challenges that are facing social entrepreneurs in Africa. Because this research done in 19 countries, like I said, realized that the social entrepreneurs have solutions. So the question is, why aren't those solutions making kind of systems change that we want to see? And we realize it's because they are working in silos. They have technical experts with them. They have researchers working with them. They're not going the full circle, where they are bringing in the government bodies that are and ensuring that they embrace the policies that are in the house, or lobbying for the policies that help them work better. We've also realized that they're not working very closely with the private sector, and the private sector is very important, especially when it comes to driving the market. And we also realized that the community, depending on what it is that they're working on, and I'll give you the example, I'll show you an example in the next slide, community has to be at the center of the solution. So let's go to the next slide so that I show how that works. So this is an example of an organization that we are supporting in South Sudan. And it's a social enterprise that is supporting women in the area of peanut butter production. Now, the entrepreneur who is leading this program has identified this initiative, or should I say this enterprise, as a very good way of building the livelihoods of women in South Sudan. And that is because they're already growing the peanuts. They already have a tradition of making peanut butter that they consume locally and also export to the neighboring counties. Now, the two problems that are making this solution not as, should I say, transformation as it should be. One of them is that their technology that is being used is too slow, because the original way of making peanut was, the traditional way, was slow, and therefore they don't make enough peanut butter for export or for the other regions to ensure that they have enough income for themselves. So that's one problem. The other problem is that once they make the peanut butter and sell it, the market is ready. They have already market, and in fact, they can't meet the needs of the market. But the income they're getting from it is not enough for them to consume, as well as keep the enterprise running. So that means there's a disconnect in the amount of money that they're getting vis-a-vis how much they need to sustain themselves. So that needs to be worked on. The other problem is in the leadership, because the women groups are the ones that run this together with the main entrepreneur who is supporting the program. And the women groups need to be supported in terms of capacity to understand the value of making money, and they're using that money, using part of that money, saving the rest of the money, keeping the business or the enterprise running. So the collective enterprise model, therefore, helps the community that is working in a specific enterprise to understand where the gaps are. And in this particular enterprise, because we have applied the collective enterprise model, we have been able to identify the gaps. And we're already working on ensuring that those gaps are overcome, and that in the future, we'll be able to see the women earning more money, we're able to see the leadership improving in this area, and as well as the technology that is important in ensuring that more peanut butter is produced. So once now we identify this kind of enterprises within Africa that need, should I say, an improvement in the ecosystem development, it means that we're able to transform communities doing different things. So this community is making peanut butter. Another community will be looking at something completely different. Others maybe even in just production of items and so on and so forth. And this is just one pillar, which is the economic pillar, and the same is happening in all the other pillars. So this is just an example for you to understand how pillars are working. Next slide. So we are inviting partners to work with us in the different pillars. And when we say we're inviting partners, there are many ways that partners can come on board. Where we have identified that the social entrepreneurs are looking for technical support, for example, that technical support may come from any other region and not necessarily in Africa. Maybe the technical expert we need may coming from India, for example, or Latin America or wherever. So we are open to support from any part of the world. So we are not saying that because these are social entrepreneurs in Africa and they're trying to solve African problems, we cannot work with solutions from other parts of the world. So that is clear for us. The other support we need is in resource flows. We need different kinds of resources. We need money to support some of these social entrepreneurs, but we also need resources in terms of human capital in some of these areas, especially in some areas of training. We're going to fill the gaps, the skills gaps, as well as should I say knowledge and expertise in some of the areas, and those have been identified, and we'll be able to share that if any of the people listening to us would be willing to or want to come and partner and work with us. The problem of job creation hasn't been solved in Africa, and we are still working on that. The best way to ensure that many of our youth are employed is having manufacturing happening. And none of these pillars is necessarily looking at manufacturing, but it's part of the whole thinking, because when you talk about the narrative shift, what are our leaders doing about that? When you talk about ecosystem development, is it looking at industry or different industries that can be scaled to ensure that there are more jobs for young people in Africa? So we're looking for partners who can help us build industries can engage or employ our young people in Africa. I think I'll stop there for now. I know we have more time. I don't know whether this is time for questions or comments from the audience, or do we have time for questions? I think that's what I should ask.
Thank you so much. We do have a few minutes for questions, but people will need to type those into the Whova app. I can look to see if people are asking, or perhaps my colleague can type them in to Teams so we can see it there. But I do have a question for you too. I think, and just in your approach, which I think is so powerful, are you seeing support from the global north, as people say, or from the United States? How are people in the United States supporting your efforts and engaging with you?
We are inviting them to engage with us. The initiative was only launched last year, so we have already had conversations with the donors. So that has been the group that we've already had a discussion with. And we are exploring how that looks like. So because I know there has been discussion about capacity building, and then the question is, what is the capacity that we're building? Because we are very clear at the Africa Forward initiative that we don't want capacity we don't want a blanket capacity building. We want to be able to identify the actual skills or the actual gaps that we need in the social entrepreneurs that are doing this work in Africa, so that when we build that capacity, then we know that we have solved a problem. So we are looking to, should I say, we would like partners to come and explore the gaps with us, so that it's not determined prior to that collaboration with us. Then we can co-create the solution to ensure that it is the correct solution for challenges that we are facing. So that's the only, that's the way we are looking at it. We are open to collaboration, but let's co-create so that we have the correct solution for us. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, we have a few more questions coming in from the audience. One is from Sukaria's group there, and they say from their hands-on experience in their program's gender equality program with empowering adolescent girls in slums, they're asking, why do you think funding agencies always support a program for just a single year when they know it takes multiple years of intervention to reflect a measurable change?
Why the question is, why do I think they support for a year?
Yes. Why do you think many funding agencies only do single-year funding?
That's a very good question, because that's the same question we're asking at Africa. I mean, the Africa Forward initiative, and that's where we have a new design, because we are saying we want you to support a pillar, because then it is a, should I say, the design of support is very clear, so that whatever little amount or much amount you put into the support, it doesn't stop the year. Because you see, the way we have designed the pillar is that because sometimes it is that maybe the funding is limited, maybe there's a limited amount of resources. The way we have planned the Africa Forward, it doesn't matter how much you have in terms of resources, whether it's human resources or capital or funding. We are able to structure it together to ensure that it is part of the process, and therefore it doesn't leave a gap, even if it is only for 1 year. Because this 1 year projects are not going to form. Systems change can never be done in 1 year. It has to be, it's a long journey. The journey has to be structured from the beginning to the end. And even if Wamuyu is not there tomorrow, journey has been structured in such a way that whoever is there will be able to continue with that to ensure that the changes happen over the long period that has been put into consideration.
Great, yeah, and maybe a message, I think, from several that are watching to funders to look for multi-year funding and look for patient capital that really can invest. No, I think that's a really good point. We have another question also. I know there are a few people watching in the audience that are involved in advocacy here in the United States. And we're always wondering, what do you see the appropriate role for the US government, in particular USAID, in supporting and really attaining these strategic shifts that you all are talking about? Can you describe kind of the proper role for US government participation?
The US government has supported Africa for many years. And in fact, that's probably one of the biggest problems, because the many years sometimes may have yielded some support, or rather may have yielded some change, transformational change, but not enough, and unfortunately not enough. So my question always is, why is it not enough? And my own take on this is that the solutions have not been co-created. Because for areas where I have been part of the US aid, I find that the solutions are predicted. Is that the correct English word? Yeah. So there's no opportunity for the homegrown solutions. In fact, I haven't used the word homegrown solution today intentionally, but it has still come to my talking, because I believe that we need to scale the homegrown solutions, because we do have solutions in Africa. But if you come with money, a bag of money, and tell me as Wamuyu or as whoever, Wamuyu, this is the money I have for you, but I would like you to do it this way. You find that many social entrepreneurs and organizations are so desperate for resources that they don't want to have a discussion around anything different other than what has been proposed. But Africa Forward initiative gives us an opportunity to say, thank you very much, we want to work with you, but can we do it a little differently? Can we tweak this so that we are able to solve the problems we see sitting in the continent and appreciating the challenges that we're facing? So I believe that if USAID comes to Africa Forward and we have a good discussion around how we move this, we'll be able to, that fund will go further, to run further and make a bigger difference than it's making right now. That's my thinking.
That's great. No, that's a really good comment. And tomorrow, actually, in the Global Washington Conference in Seattle, we have someone from USAID coming to speak about how they are trying to shift the way they do business and trying to shift it so that it is more inclusive, more participatory. But I think we'll see, and your points are really well taken. I have a question for you as well. We know 2030 is right around the corner, and again, that's a target and a goal, and it's not like these programs will stop after 2030. But I do want to hear if you feel optimistic about the future, about the next few years in particular, about reaching some of the targets through your work. I know you're aligning with the SDGs. So how are you feeling about the progress, and given that COVID had many setbacks? So how are you feeling about the future?
Together with research that has been done, the 2030 goals may not be met. And that is because of all those things we mentioned, including COVID. But I am happy that because of the tweaking that's happening, and many people, including Catalyst 2030, consciously tweaking the way that it's not business as usual. They're saying it's not business as usual. It cannot be business as usual if we are going to make the kind of systems change that we're looking to make. So we may not get there, but I think we will do better than we would have done if we were not making this conscious effort, because we are definitely making conscious efforts to move this in the direction that was planned when the 2030 goals were set. So and some probably more than others, but I still believe that we have a few more years. And at the end of that, because things are moving pretty well after COVID now, we are kind of back to normal, hopefully. And I believe that in the next few years, we'll be able to move this faster than we have in the last 3 years. So I think let's not be too ambitious and believe that we shall meet the goals, but let's work very hard to get as close as possible to the goals that we set. That's
great. No, really good points. And obviously the efforts will continue. I have one more question, and you mentioned this, and we heard this morning from Nana from AVPN, and we have a speaker tomorrow, Dagan Ali, who will be talking a lot about building trust and building relationships, which is a core tenet of co-creation. How do you think that can be best established? Obviously, your effort is a huge step forward in that, and creating those pillars, I think, actually really does build transparency, builds trust. But in particular, thinking about trust between donors or supporters in the United States with those that you're working with in Africa, how best do you think we can increase those meaningful relationships and build trust?
Well, my experience is that sometimes I have to be very politically correct in what I'm saying right now. There's sometimes we have is it called bias? We want to do things in a particular way, but sometimes we are unable to, and therefore, when we talk about co-creation, I'm encountering many people who come to Africa, for example, and say, we want to change the way we do things. We want to work with you. We want to co-create. But when we sit at the table, something happens and the co-creation doesn't quite happen. And it calls for a farm leader. And I am sometimes that farm leader who reminds the team that we are co-creating, guys, we are co-creating. So can we sit back and co-create, kind of a thing. So we want to, but I think we have to relearn. I mean, there's a process of relearning to ensure that when we get to the table, we remind ourselves that there's a difference in how we're doing things now. So I think that as long as we keep on reminding ourselves that we have shifted the way we're doing things, we will get there. And then we need should I say, all leaders, depending on where you are, to stand up and say and remind everybody else that this is what we're doing. And I'm talking about leaders from all sides, because even within the donor community, there are those who have already relearned, but there are others who are still lagging behind. So let's keep reminding each other that we're making a shift, and that will happen.
That's a great answer. I do think, again, co-creation is just a word. And again, we can deconstruct that, or we can throw that word out. What we're talking about is building good relationships. And like you said, if you get people around the table with an open mindset to really relearn what we have done in the past, then it can open up new pathways. I think that's really important. Well, this has been fantastic. Such a good conversation. And again, I'm really excited about this because, and Catalyst 2030 and your work is because Global Washington has aligned our work with the Sustainable Development Goals for the past several years. And we cluster our members around the SDGs and encourage people to understand the work that our members are doing to advance the SDGs as well. I applaud all the work going into this, the movement for the SDGs, and in particular, just making sure that we're all working together and supporting each other. Do you want to say any last words or any anything else you want to leave with the group?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank all those who have come to listen to our presentation and who have been part of this conversation and for the questions. And I also want, again, to invite them to come and work with us in Africa if they're not in Africa. And those who are in Africa, please join Catalyst 2030. It's the movement for all social entrepreneurs. And we're making good progress. So please come and be part of our movement. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Wando, do you want to say anything more? I know your internet might not be so stable. Do you have anything else to leave us with?
Point you to our social media handles if you want to, because there's no chat. So Catalyst 2030, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, our website. And if you want to learn more about Africa Forward, we are right there on the catalyst2030.net to find out more information on how you can partner with us. So thank you so much for the opportunity. We appreciate it.
Wonderful. And such a great movement. Thank you. Thank you. And again, I'm excited about this conversation because it really does reflect what we've heard today and sets us up for really good conversations tomorrow for the in-person. So I think it's time for us to transition to our next speaker. I'm really excited to have our next speaker here. We have here with us Natalia Lozano, who is the CAMY Fund Director from Seattle International Foundation. And if you are based in Seattle, you might recognize the organization, Seattle International Foundation. It started in Seattle and is primarily really run out of Central America now. It really reflects what we've all been talking about of shifting the center of decision-making and leadership to Central America. Natalia is in charge of CAMY, which stands for the Central America and Mexico Youth Fund, which supports youth leaders in their community. If you've ever met Natalia, she's a rock star, and definitely read her bio. She's been a youth advocate and now just leading other youth in strengthening their communities. So with that, I'll turn it over to Natalia.
Thank you, Kristen, for this lovely introduction. I'm thankful to Global Washington for the opportunity to speak up about Seattle International Foundation and the youth program, which is the Central America and Mexico Youth Fund. My name is Natalia Lozano. I am CAMY Fund's program director. And as Kristen said, I used to work prior CIF within this youth social movement. So I was part of this movement in Honduras, Central America, working towards women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and youth rights. For over 15 years, I was working on grassroots organizations and trying to make change happen directly in Honduras to guarantee the respect and acknowledgement of our human rights. But as a former grantee partner, and what brings me here today, I identify with my coworkers that we were always questioned as a partner. We were always questioned as youth leaders, and we were always questioned as change makers. And whenever we had the opportunity to access funding, we realized that there was an invasive approach from some donors towards the priorities and agenda that we identify as a need. We were also questioned for strategies that were built from our own worldview, the way we knew change could happen, but this was not valued because we were young leaders, or the countries are seen with a lot of mistrust due to the different corruption that you might know about the region of Central America. We were forced to do activities that were a priority for a donor, but not a priority for the community, which was something that was somehow disconnected. And the challenges of not receiving flexible funding, following a strict planning, that with no possibilities to adapt to change, were also a big challenge. So I'm here today because during 10 years prior coming to CIF, we tried from different organizations to change the mindset of donors and to change this perspective of mistrust of the countries or mistrust towards youth advocates. And we start making these conversations happen. why we needed to be trusted and how we knew that social change can happen, because we live in this reality and we face it every day. So some donors did listen and they changed their type of relationship with us. And then for over 15 years being in the youth movement, I made the decision to come to this other perspective that brings me to the other side of the river, to say it in a different way. And the foundation and the CAMY Fund program specifically was promoting this philanthropy based on trust, this way of treating grantees as partners, and the reasoning among flexible funds to create an environment of growth. And for us, not just to be donors, but actually be an active part of change, of social change, not just handing money, but having an active participation while trusting the organizations and the path that they want to follow. So we grant financial, technical, and political support to these initiatives, collectives, and youth organizations based in Central America and Mexico to strengthen the youth social movements in favor of their human rights. The program principles include power to the youth, flexible and autonomous funding, and organizational strengthening. And we focus in Central America due to the different realities that youth is facing. For example, all the criminalization against NGOs, against young people, and how is this making a huge impact in the social movement in general, but how is young people having this active part of the role across this region and also the world. In Guatemala, we have a repressive context, criminalization of protest, anti-rights movements promoting restrictive laws, such as proposal of family and life protection bill. In Honduras, there is certain hope of having the first female president to guarantee sexual and reproductive health and rights, but this still is an issue and it's still challenging to bring these rights into the table as a priority and discussion. So we also see that despite having this new government, there are still challenges to prioritize the sexual and reproductive health and rights agenda and many other restrictive issues that they're trying to open a little bit more to civil society, but it's not looking the same way for young activists. In El Salvador, there's the proposed foreign agents law tabled for now, but digital espionage has been legalized by Legislative Assembly following publicized Pegasus hacks of journalists. So we also have a lot of young people within their networks being attacked through these different tools of digital espionage that is not allowing them to move forward with their human rights agenda, which they want to guarantee within their country. Nicaragua has many restrictions, including the one on digital espionage, but there's also the foreign agents law and the closure of NGOs by the government, and the country is blocked for any international assistance on human rights, and it's cataloged as terrorism, which makes young people not being able to move forward with what they feel development and change-making should be. And then also the whole country, but young people is taking the worst part of this role. And in Mexico, we can see many progress in certain states, but it's not the whole country. The country it's huge. It's the largest one that we fund, and the feminist movement has been moving forward with many actions to mobilize effectively around defined political agendas, with significant political victories, but the challenges remain in fully realizing the rights for all, like the access to abortion continues to be limited in 27 of 32 states. So the progress is still a little bit slow on sexual and reproductive health and rights. And overall, young people located in these countries, they face, as youth social movements, several challenges. As adult centrism, where any policy change or the access to funding or many of the tools that we need to develop a country are not youth friendly, and they're usually located for adults or really more experienced organizations, which they don't always have the answer. There's few meaningful youth consultations there's few young youth people participating in these decision-making spaces, and this makes young people not being part of the present, of the things that are happening today. We also have the international agenda not aligned with the youth vision due to the things that I said like now, and these challenges. But the youth vision is not even portrayed as something serious to move forward with. And it's not being consulted, and they're not an active part of it to build it and make it possible. And there's limited knowledge about funding opportunities and many challenges that are in this specific one, like the language to access funds. Most organizations need to have someone that speaks English, and Central America and Mexico, you won't find a wide group of people speaking English. This is more privilege. Language is a privilege, and access to information, it is a privilege. And also the political culture is taking measures against young people. If you see for the human rights reports, they usually don't talk about the specific things that are happening to young people or how they're taking this active part into change, to being change makers. But I'll try to move a little bit away from Central America and give some examples that are more worldwide. Young people have been this force to impulse social change. And we can see this through all history of the world. And some examples that we can measure right now, like today, is, for example, Argentina and the green wave for abortion rights that made a huge impact around the world. We also see in Chile all of the protests that have been youth-led, most of them, and having now the youngest president into making this change happen and giving young people the voice to make this change happen. In Iran, there's many people putting themselves at risk for the rights of young women and what's going on in the country, and to discuss on what is religion and what is something that by law should be required or not. We can see the climate justice movement around the world led by young people. And we can have many examples that I believe that are coming to many listeners' mind as I speak. Young people, we are present. They're present. Many people are making change happen within their local communities, at a regional level, international level, and every voice really matters, and what young people needs to say should be put as a priority within the agendas, and not just with meaningful youth consultations and active participation, and not being instrumentalized on how they should speak or what's the priority that we should follow. They can give us, as donors, this line of how we can make change happen and be an active part of it. And then we identify through this model how trust-based philanthropy plays an important role. When we fund organizations with or without a legal entity, we have something extra to give to them, not just the money, but we can see the work that they're doing. We identified youth movements having more intersectionality approach, including more populations. They try to fight back within their complex realities. Their contribution lies in their impact as they develop novel forms of citizen participation and political exercise, and acting directly in communities, territories, whether physical, virtual, or tangible, and subjectivities. We also see that donors and the philanthropic community can be fundamental for the youth movements. If we can work from a place of horizontality and respect, and a political position of knowing that youth movements are capable of modifying agendas that contribute to systemic change and the recognition of human rights in the region where we work. And we organize grantees through portfolios in a way to understand what, like, the guideline of funds that we are doing in the region. But we invest through grassroots youth-led organizations overall, organized in different ways as groups, collectives, organizations, or initiatives, which are the ones who develop the work within the countries and who receive an annual or biannual grant to develop the proposed projects. Through this process, one of the things that trust-based philanthropy needs is for organizations to take this risk to transform. This is a model that hasn't been used widely. It's coming to these conversations, but to transform this approach, we need to be in peace with being able to reformulate strategies until we find a way that fits our organization. And we will do mistakes along the way. And maybe sometimes we will question if this is the right model, but when we measure impact, not just from a quantitative perspective, but a qualitative perspective, where we include all of the work that has been done by the social movements, or how the organizations that we're funding are following these flexible plans, adapting to change. And this is how you make change happen. You adapt to change. So trust is a key thing that we can work with the grantee partners, but the trust doesn't come only from the partners to the donor, but also from the donor to the partners. How do we give this power for them to make their own decision, have autonomous agendas, and we follow and believe that this idea can be possible? And how can we make this, how can we facilitate for this to happen? Because we believe that what they're proposing is relevant. Representation also matters. How do we include people from the regions that we're funding into the power structures of decision makers to give also this perspective and move forward with a more equitative agenda for everyone? And how do we move forward with these movements that we think it's relevant to fund into making trust-based philanthropy a reality? You can start by making principles. You can start by taking some of the key ideas of this, or participating in different conversations on how we can have trust-based philanthropy as a model. But the truth is that not every model will fit for every organization. And this is what we need to risk, to find out what works for us as donors and what can work for the organizations that we're funding. And for this, communication is key. Thank you very much.
Natalia, that was so inspiring. Thank you so much. I can't tell if I would rather have you leading a youth movement or leading the funding philanthropic side, but I'm glad you're doing both. If you have a moment for a couple of questions, I know you have a busy schedule, but so it's just really inspiring. I'm wondering if you have talked about kind of the challenges of youth in terms of language, information sharing, or getting the information, especially about funding on that side. Can you give an example of where you think that's changed? How are maybe Seattle International Foundations or others, how are you reaching? And especially I can imagine there are very loose movements, I imagine too, that don't have a organized organization that you can even fund. How do philanthropists break down some of those barriers? You've talked about it a little bit. Can you give an example of how to really get to youth that are creating really effective movements?
Well, one of the language being a challenge is really tough because we need to give access to the grants that we're giving in Spanish. We're funding Central America and Mexico. So if we're including these countries, we need to guarantee that the whole baggage of information that we're handing needs to be accessible and in Spanish. That's like the bare minimum to fund a region. Like if you're funding a country that speaks French, that will be the challenge. If they're speaking other language, not thinking that English will be the universal language for everyone. Representation matters. So for us at Seattle International Foundation, we have people located as program officers in Costa Rica, El Salvador, and we also have in Mexico, and we have also staff hired in Guatemala. I am based in Honduras, and the whole foundation, despite being Seattle-based, has a lot of people across the different regions that we're funding. So we also have a context analysis that is faster because we have people that is living in the countries and going through the same things as these movements. And we also promoted hiring young people to be part of the decision-making from a donor's perspective. So the team is basically between 24 years old and 35. I'm 34 and I'm the director. So also having other young people within the power structure and this dynamic of the donor's perspective brings you a different view on how things might work. and also the experience. I remember being in a project where they used to say it's youth friendly, but the formats were crazy. Like they were asking so much information that was not even needed. And there was no instructions on how to fill those formats. And I remember having the discussion like, I've led other projects that are complex. And this is why for me, this is not easy, but I can do it. But the rest of platforms were struggling so much. It was like, it's logical because they have never led this type of complex programs. So when you're doing something youth friendly, you need feedback from young people for them to tell you if that's truly youth friendly, and create the spaces for young people to speak up. This is other thing that we try to do with CADEF, the Central American Donors Forum. We wanted young people's participation, so we open scholarships for these people to participate. And we guarantee a scholarship for every speaker that made a proposal and was finally selected. And this was one way to do it. And now we're discussing in the foundation how we can make this better and more accessible for young people. So given the role of participation, understanding that as donors, we have the power to make these voices stronger, that's another way that you can break these barriers. And the most important one is networking amongst different donors that are going through the same process. So you can have lessons learned and how to better do this implementation. What works for CAMY and the Settle International Foundation might not work for other organizations, but maybe there's another one that does a different type of work that might work with the same principles. So making this discussion happen between donors is also relevant to make these barriers a little bit lower.
That's such good points. I've also heard that some donors actually have different requirements for grantees outside the United States rather than inside the United States, and in a way that is not useful. And it goes back to what you said, what Nena said this morning, the trust of what it means to give money outside the United States. It sometimes for philanthropists, it's not there. And it becomes this barrier where it's not equitable, and it's not thinking about, again, like you said, the requirements that aren't needed, and why are they asking all these questions, and what is that? There needs to be a level of trust and a level, and for you all, it's proximity, which is fantastic, that having those relationships is so important. So I think you are teaching other funders a little more best practices around that as well.
Thank you, Kristen. I also feel that in our case, Settle International Foundation is a donor for Central America and Mexico, but we're also a grantee for several donors based in the US. So this type of organization exists, and we can fund organizations, countries, collectives, platforms, initiatives, and young people where other donors can't reach. So we are a channel to make this happen. We are also connecting, for example, with the University of Washington to take these initiatives also into a more academic level so we can position them. And we're trying to use the privilege that we have in this foundation to bring these voices in different spaces and make people a little bit less hesitant to fund young organizations and youth-led organizations specifically. And this is why we also give the extra mile, because some donors that are not able to fund directly in the region, if they channel the money through Settle International Foundation, we also guarantee technical support. This means that if the organization is not able to provide some of the information, like because they're lacking of this experience specifically, we have one-on-one with these organizations to make these formats being filled as we need them to be. And we try to do it through interviews, videos, monitoring social media that they have, all of the products that they built. And this way we also create a joyful narrative. So we're not just handing the money, but also getting more interaction in how they do the work, avoiding micromanagement, but in a more, this word doesn't exist in English, acompañamiento, like, like being there for them and giving them a support beyond the money. So we got involved in a way that is not invasive, respectful, but on the terms of the grantee partner.
That's great. Yeah, I think it's so important that you're mitigating the perceived risk for a funder. So if there's a company or a small foundation that they want to get money to community-based organizations in Central America and Mexico, they can go through Seattle International Foundation. I think that's really important. And again, I think it's important to find those intermediaries if people don't have the capacity. And as we've learned, the time and patience and the investment to build those relationships so that they know that the investments are really getting to where it's needed. So this is fantastic. Do you have any last words you want to leave with our audience?
My only reflection is that thinking through all this process, taking risks can make the world move and change and reshape itself. And right now it's considered a risk because it's not oftenly practiced. But I know that many organizations that want to do big impact around the world, wherever you're donating and working with organizations, you will see the difference when you trust the people you're funding in a different way, where you know that they're doing what they're doing because they know how to do it. And learning from other people that is not in a privileged position is powerful. And for us, we have a really big work, important work with human rights defenders of all ages, intergenerational. And the work that they do is simply amazing. And we sit and learn because we know we can have the privilege of the money and the financial support, but the knowledge is based in the grassroots organizations. And change doesn't start with big actions, but starts little by little, step by step, to make it sustainable through many other years. So let's take a risk together.
Thank you so much. That was extremely inspiring. I'm really feeling hopeful for the future, hopeful for your work. Thank you for everything you do in your work and to create this community.